You're listening to WCPT's To the Left with Samina and Shauna. Here's our hosts, Samina Mustafa and Shauna East.
Thanks, Lady B. Welcome back. And we're back. I'm Samina Mustafa.
And I'm Shauna East.
We are back, January 13th.
Here we are.
Wow, what a week. It feels like it's been 10 years this week.
Yes, it definitely does.
Well, real quick, if you are listening to this, you can also watch this on Facebook Live. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/To the Left Radio. All of our handles are To the Left Radio, so you can tweet at us. We have an Instagram account, and we have a Patreon account because we are a listener-supported radio because the patriarchy needs to be smashed. And that requires money, people. I'm just saying.
True.
But we have an exciting show. We're going to be talking about the federal shutdown. We have a special guest who is an EPA scientist, Lorene Targos, who's with the AFGE local, and Byron Sixto Lopez, who's a candidate in the 25th Ward. He's an aldermanic race. So, but we've got a lot to talk about before that. I have something on my mind. I want to just kind of...
So, here we go.
Yeah. I want to get your thoughts about this. So we've had a few folks this week who've also declared that they're running for president. We had Julian Castro declare, and we also had Tulsi Gabbard just announced. And Julian Castro, I think he's saying all the right things. It's got this Medicare for all, and there's people picking it apart. But the thing that I'm concerned about is, and it's funny because actually Ellen and Scott were talking about it during their show on Out Chicago about Tulsi's record on marriage equality. She hasn't been an ally always, and that's, understandably problematic. But and there are other folks who are like, she made her central sort of announcement war and peace. So the issue of endless war, like that, those are important issues. But to me, I feel like she's problematic specifically because she's been aligned with Modi, who is, and to me, is India's Trump. He is the prime minister in India, and he's part of basically a movement that's been going on for like over 15 years, a very, Islamophobic. There were the riots in Gujarat, which is a state that he was the governor of. There were 2,000 Muslims that were killed. And so for her to be associated with him, be supporting him, and be supported by supporters of him and folks like him is troubling to me, to say the least. And it just bothers me. I've seen a lot of people say, I'm not going to play identity politics. These are smear pieces. I'm like, then that just means you just don't care about people who are like me. I think that's all that conveys to me. Now, Tulsi should be judged on her record, what she's done and what she said, as all the candidates should be. But it just troubles me that people are like, this is like fake news. I'm like, no, it's just something that we need to assess as part of who she is as a candidate.
Well, for me, so I know Tulsi from, she left her position with the DNC and took a bold stand to support Bernie back in 2016. I know her being very progressive on domestic issues, and I know very little about, other than hearing hearsay from other people about
why
her.
do you characterize that as hearsay?
Because I actually press people and I say, can you give me an article because I want to learn more, and they won't give it to me.
Okay. I've shared several articles, and I'm happy to share them with you. And this is something actually, I actually had an episode about this last September because there was this group, there was a meeting in Chicago called the World Hindu Congress where these folks were meeting. And there was actually ended up being a violent confrontation between protesters and attendees. And for that gathering, folks reached out to people like Tulsi, Raja Krishnamurthy, and said, please do not attend this, make a statement. And I will give Tulsi this. She did make a statement and distance herself from those folks, but she has historically been associated with them. Now, Raja Krishnamurthy attended that event and has, as far as I know, has yet to make a statement about it. So here's what I'm saying. If war and peace is your sort of central message, be aware of how you have been supporting and perhaps somewhat contradicting your stance on these issues when it comes to foreign rulers.
Do you think that there's the potential for her to be moved about this, though?
I think the fact that she made a statement and that she did not attend that meeting in Chicago, the World Hindu Congress, was was promising, and I appreciated that. But the fact that people are sort of dismissing it and not, and like the term you use, hearsay, it's like, no, the people have been writing about this for years in India and here. It's like, it's not news to us. It's just we don't have robust coverage of foreign policy, and we certainly don't cover India, and we haven't probably for 40, 50 years. So people just don't know what's going on in India. But that's another issue. But what I'm concerned about is that people are sort of dismissing. It's like, no, this is just like you are concerned about, say, Kamala Harris not, prosecuting One West Bank, just like you're concerned maybe about, sort of Julian Castro's neoliberal past or, not being as progressive. Like, this is just part of how we are going to evaluate her. Like, if she's going to make her central point, war and peace, then we're going to evaluate her on that first.
Yeah, so what I say about Tulsi is I know her on domestic issues, and I've heard a lot of things about her foreign policy being problematic, but I need to know more. So that's just how I talk about Tulsi. I don't completely write her off as a person, because her record in the U.S. has been very progressive. So I just try to have a more nuanced discussion, because people tend to have these like visceral reactions and they're like, ah! And I'm like, I can't take it anymore. Like it actually is nuance to these discussions, and we need to learn to be able to have differences with people. Like we can have differences and we can talk about it and come, to a greater understanding and learn from each other. And I feel like that's just what I'm striving for at all times these days. Yeah,
and I'm like I said I appreciated that she took a step back and she was able to people were able to move her. I actually talked to Raja directly that weekend that it happened and said, you know what, if you attend this, the Muslim community is not going to be happy with you. He went anyway. So, I mean, that's, that's something that, and I'm saying, like, people should just be able to have that conversation, just like people have the conversation about Beto's record. It's the same thing. Like, here's how primaries work, guys. People get to ask questions, hear answers, and whether they like the answers or not, they get to make a decision. So that's all I'm saying is what folks are doing is actually doing the opposite of what you just said. They're just saying, categorically, this is just an attack from the establishment. It's like, no.
Yeah.
This is like, there's some merit here. Yes, are there attacks on certain candidates that may be aligned with Bernie or perhaps aren't, what they perceive as sort of Democrats that are loyal to the party? That I could totally see, and I can see that, but it's like, no, let's peel away those layers and see what's actually been said and done. And I've been hearing this from people in India, people who travel to India a lot, and from folks who are just more familiar with the political situation there. And it's like, no, there's something there. There's a there there. So there's something to talk about.
So when you say that she's aligned with them, she just hasn't been as vocal at speaking out against them, or has she done things that have shown that she's an ally to them? Or
yeah, I mean, she's attended events with them, and here's what's tricky, because I look at this is where it gets kind of fuzzy, and I would actually love it if somebody could share this, how much she's gotten money from folks who are sort of like supporters of that movement there. Similarly with Raja, the same thing. It's like how much of there's a group in the U.S. called HAF, Hindu American Foundation, which is actually known for being the sort of essentially right-wing group. And she's attended their events, similarly I think Raja has as well, and they tend to kind of fly under the radar because they're a nonprofit and they have a foundation in their name. And again, they sound legitimate and like they're above board, but a lot of these groups have very anti-Muslim views, and this again is just not being covered in the U.S. Now, again, I think maybe in the last year or two she was sort of distancing herself because she was anticipating a run, but it's something that people should be aware of. And what the issue isn't even about Tulsi. It's just the fact that so many people who call themselves progressives are like, oh, this doesn't matter, or this is fake news. It's like, that just tells me you don't care.
I think it's also the tribalism. It's like very much like, don't say anything. She stuck up for Bernie. I don't want to hear it. Without actually looking at these types of nuanced discussions that we need to do. And another thing I wanted to mention was the primary is when the most democracy happens.
Yeah.
So if you like a candidate on a lot of fronts, but they are problematic in certain areas, this is the chance to move them.
Yeah.
To put public pressure on them to say, you know, we support X, Y, and Z that you're fighting for, but you are not good on this, this, and this. And that's what I hope we see happen with several. Warren, Tulsi,
all of
Bernie if he runs, and
that's what I think all we can ask is for folks to be engaged and ask those questions, and I think that's important. But I want to get to something that was exciting. You were in D.C. this past week. Yeah, so let's talk about that.
It was really exciting. So basically, I am a part of the Illinois Poor People's Campaign, and there was supposed to be a big press conference on Monday in D.C. to announce the next phase of our campaign, which is going to deal with voter suppression and bringing disenfranchised folks back into, you know, the political fold and engaging them. And I was like, oh, I really want to be there because I'm so excited about the 116th Congress and that we have some more left folks in there that we can work with. So I was like, I'm going to go. And I bought my ticket and I paid for my place to stay, non-refundable, of course. And then just a couple days before, because of the shutdown, Poor People's Campaign decided to hold off on giving those demands to Congress because they just didn't think strategically it made sense to do during the shutdown. Mm-hmm. They wanted to address like all the workers who are losing pay and furloughed, and they didn't think that that was the right thing to do right now. But I was already headed to D.C. So
I'm coming, y'all. Reopen the government.
Yeah.
I'm coming.
So basically what happened was I was like, I'm going to make the most of this.
Right.
And I found out about H.R. 1 being up in the House, which deals with fighting corruption. It deals with voter suppression issues and expanding democracy and some other things. And it's actually a very good bill. And so I took the opportunity to make some appointments with some representatives and senatorial staff. And I met Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the representative from New York, and I spoke with her, and I met the representative Rashida Tlaib from Michigan, and actually, interestingly, Rep. Schneider, Brad Schneider from Illinois, who is, you know, he's actually he's a Democrat, but
he's a new Democrat.
Yeah,
he's part of the New Democrat
coalition. He's you know, conservative in some areas, and you know, but he's a co-sponsor on H.R. 1.
That's right.
And we talked about the war in Yemen because he's against the war in Yemen. So it was interesting to try to, you know, have these kind of discussions with someone who I might not agree with in every way, but we can, you know, work together on certain issues, and that was really interesting. And met with Dick Durbin's staff, Tammy Duckworth's staff, and several other offices in just a few days. And it was so awesome to feel like, for the first time, that I can just walk in there and have these meetings that I feel like we're at a turning point. We have some people like our age group that have similar politics that have been elected and that we can work with. And it was just an amazing experience.
That's awesome.
And everyone was really into the Poor People's Campaign.
That's even better news. That's even better news. That's really great.
And I put the fear of God into them a little bit. So I said, you know, we're going to be doing a lot of deep canvassing in your district. So let's keep in touch. And they're like, yeah, keep in touch, okay?
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, that's great, because I feel like that's what's actually exciting is that there's voices. It's like an inside-outside strategy, right? Like there's people who actually agree with us, who are there, who can advance this legislation, and so that's great. But how was it to be in D.C.? And we're going to be talking about it with Lorene, to be in D.C. during the shutdown, like.
So, I mean, you don't realize until you go to D.C. I mean, maybe you do if you have a government job, but I mean, everything was closed. Like, all the museums were closed. Right. Like, people were there for vacations and they couldn't do anything. I was talking to cab drivers and stuff that are like, yeah, we're losing money. All the businesses are losing money. Like, people who aren't government workers are losing money because of, everything being affected. And, it was messed up because when I went into all these offices, like all the calls, the phones were just ringing off the hook. And you could hear the staff just like, yes, we know, we're doing our best. Like, this is being held up by the president. And like,
right.
It was really terrible.
Yeah. And I think, here in Chicago, there are federal workers, and we're going to be talking to one shortly. But again, we're sort of not immersed in it. It's not like every single agency, like the local restaurant or, whatever. I think people were doing like shutdown cocktails at some of the happy hour places. But again, people didn't on Friday. Some people didn't get a paycheck.
For the first paycheck they got was $0.
Yeah, which I want everyone to imagine if you got a paycheck that said $0 and you were expecting a paycheck. That's real, and it's not like this whole like narrative of like, oh, it's just all Democrats. It's like, no, they're just people with families.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting, and we got to take a break in a second, is that the air traffic control employees are not being paid. And so when I was in the plane on the way home, I was like, are they like walking out of their job and they can't quit because they're
essential.
They're essential, so they're being required to work without pay, which is just criminal.
Yeah, watch it, Shauna. Yes, it's awesome. It's awful. So and that's scary because I'm actually like, this is the longest federal shutdown in history.
Correct.
Where we've exceeded. And Mitch McConnell, where are you, Mitch McConnell? You're missing an
Let's call this the McConnell-Trump shutdown, which is what it is.
Exactly, that's what it is. But we do need to take a break. We're going to come back with Lorene Targos and Byron Sixto Lopez. We're going to be talking about the shutdown. You are listening to the Left. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We'll be right back. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We're producing a show on WCPT Sundays at 1 o'clock.
What should we call it?
How about Smash the Patriarchy?
I like it, but that's a lot of pressure. What about left-leaning ladies?
What about womansplaining?
Yeah, but what about when we have guys on? What about Madigan's worst nightmare?
He gets enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in to the Left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
And we're back. You're listening to the Left. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
Is her mic's good? Okay. We're back, and we've got some guests in studio. We've got Lorene Targos of the AFGE Local 704. She's an EPA scientist, and we're talking about the shutdown. But before we get into it, I just want to remind folks who are listening on WCPT 820. We're also on Facebook Live. If you go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/ToTheLeftRadio, you can hear us and see us there. All of our handles are at To The Left Radio. You can tweet at us, hashtag To The Left if you have questions. You can also call in to 773-763-9278. That's 763-WCPT. But first, we want to just welcome our guests. Lorene, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so as we just said, this is the longest shutdown federal shutdown in U.S. history. And you are a union steward of the AFGE Local 704, which is the EPA. You're a scientist at the EPA. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you do at the EPA and just how, because this is not the first time you've been through a shutdown. So,
right. So just in the past year, the federal government has technically been shut down 3 times. This is the first time where we haven't had enough of an appropriation to get past it. Some were a few hours, some were like maybe one day. But this is the first one where we've actually been locked out of our workplace. So I'm a scientist at EPA. I started in August of 2015, and I work in the Great Lakes National Program Office. That's under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So if folks want to read about the work that we do, they can go to our outreach website, which is greatlakesmud.org. That's MUD, like mud in the bottom of a river.
Yeah. But, I mean, it obviously affects our entire region, the work you do.
Absolutely.
And I remember actually talking to you about a year ago when there was a shutdown imminent. And what you said to me is that, if the shutdown does in fact happen, there are some things that we are working on, projects are working on, that if we don't hit that deadline, then there's actually going to be effect well beyond, this cycle, this period. It'll be long, the effects will be long felt. And so what's happening with programs and projects right now? Obviously there's...
Yeah, I think there are, more than 10,000 EPA staff all across the country, and I believe they have maybe 800 people working right now as essential. That means that, polluters aren't being inspected, runoff isn't being, paid attention to. The Great Lakes region gets more rain now than it did 10 years ago because of climate change, and that affects how, Lake Erie is aging, and always has an algal bloom in the winter, but as it rains longer and longer, that stuff can run off into there's so many impacts that we won't even be able to imagine until we get back into the office, until this summer when our projects are delayed because we didn't get the permits when we needed them in January.
Right. Now talk a little bit about. I think you had. I think it was a rally. Was it Friday?
Thursday.
Oh, was it Thursday? Okay. To obviously protest the shutdown, and so talk a little bit about that and the work that you've done for the union.
Great. So, I joined the union maybe a year after I joined the Environmental Protection Agency, and I encourage all federal workers to join their union and, make an impact. We aren't just fighting for ourselves and our missions at our respective agencies and, of course, the U.S. Constitution that we swore an oath to, but we're also fighting on behalf of the people that we work for. I mean, in Chicago, there was... we've already missed. There's a Superfund site in the East Chicago in Indiana where, homes the soil is deeply contaminated by lead. It's a Superfund site. And they had a public meeting in November, and then the community organizers, environmental justice activists in the area, ordinary families who are trying to keep their kids healthy in the face of this neurotoxin prevalent all over their environment, managed to successfully get another public meeting scheduled for January 10th. And after the government was shut down, that meeting was canceled. And of course, continues to be canceled, and there's no end in sight. I think the last day for public comment is going to be tomorrow for that site. And so we don't know what's going to happen in terms of the residents having a voice and what kind of remediation happens and how they can make sure that, their kids are protected from dangerous neurotoxins.
Yeah, and that's a whole separate conversation, sort of the environmental justice movement, which is clearly, there's been a lot of environmental issues that affect communities of color more than other communities, more affluent communities. So as far as, your, sort of the funding of your agency, has it completely dried up, or are you sort of are the programs funded to a certain date? Because I feel like I know someone who works at Social Security, his program is funded through October. There's sort of staggered funding for a lot of these programs.
That's right. So normally, the government, in a perfect world, the government would just be funded at the beginning of the fiscal year on October 1st. And funded for the whole year, so we know what we're working with. Instead, we've been funded with continuing resolutions, kicking the can down the road, and the last continuing resolution, I think, was just kicked off for a month from November to December, and that's when Trump decided that he was not going to sign the next continuing resolution or a full budget for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And as a leverage point for his political agenda, holding hundreds of thousands of workers hostage. At least 30% of the workers I work with are veterans, and 80% of American workers are paycheck to paycheck. We do not have the capacity. He was at a press conference talking about how he empathizes with workers who are missing bills and not being able to pay their mortgages, and that has not been well received by the people who are struggling right now.
Right. There was a letter I think I saw, and I can't remember which agency or which department it was, but it was basically like barter for your rent or barter for your housing costs or something like it. I mean, can you speak?
Jobs to cover.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like everyone can do manual labor, and that
carpentry. Aren't we all carpenters on the side?
Anyone need a freelance environmental health scientist?
Yeah, exactly. Can I do my job on the side to pay for my job, pay for my housing?
Even if I wanted to, I could go test soil samples somewhere, and the labs are closed. So,
right.
How am I going? I don't have my own spectrometer at home to, check out what heavy metals are going on in your soil patch in your backyard.
Right.
Has a sheen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, just the fact that you said folks who are living paycheck to paychecks, perhaps single income households. I mean, these are huge effects. I mean, Shauna was just in D.C. and saw it firsthand. What cab drivers, folks that are just aren't government employees but are affected by the government shutdown.
Definitely. And I think this is a wake-up call to, every worker, would be a federal worker or a contractor or even someone who doesn't work directly with the federal government to really come together as workers. This is impacting working class people, and we need to remember that we are strong when we unite together to fight for what's right. What we're fighting for, to reopen the government, is what's right. And we need to leverage our power to force Congress to override a veto if that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, and I think that's a good pivot because on some level that's what really the issue is. We have Trump in the White House, and we have people in Congress who are somewhat removed. Most of the folks who are legislating aren't directly affected, and sort of like, okay, how many of their constituents are saying, whether it's California, Iowa, Florida to New York, are they saying like, hey, this is affecting us day to day. You need to reopen the government. You're actually impacting not just me, but my entire family. And, there's like stories of folks, not, getting obviously, whether it's public benefits but it's always framed like, oh, these are people who are probably Democrats. I think that was one of the things that Trump said, like, oh, these are Democrats that are, that are federal workers. It's like, well, they're the federal workers who are going to keep all the members of Congress safe when they fly to and from D.C.
Exactly.
I like how AOC and Bernie are talking about how Congress shouldn't get their paycheck when there's a shutdown.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's a partial shutdown, so they are still getting their pay, and they're still in session, and maybe they're that detached from what's really happening. Although all the calls coming into the offices were definitely about, the shutdown. So, but I don't know how they respond to those. It's just the front desk people taking them.
Yeah. And I did actually see, and I think it might have been AOC and some other folks that said, I know that this wall is is being used as this bargaining chip. And I'm suffering. Like I'm struggling right now financially, but I don't want my story to be used to justify this racist wall.
Absolutely. I work with immigrants, and nobody that I work with wants $5 billion to be spent on the wall just on my projects alone. Our program cleans up the Great Lakes at a remarkable pace for only $300 million a year, which is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, a drop in the bucket. If we had that money going towards cleaning up the Great Lakes, you could eat fish next year.
Yeah.
need that money to be going to funding social programs and the things that we need. What is a wall going to do when a $25 ladder could take you right over it? I mean,
Right. And that's a scale of the federal budget and federal expenditures that people, I think the numbers get so overwhelming. I mean, the federal budget is roughly $4.5 trillion. We spend, the most recent military budget was $716 billion, and all told, it's probably roughly $1.2 trillion that we spend just on military spending. So it's like when you think of programs like your budget for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, or even things like, Title X funding, which is, family planning funding, which I think the last time I checked it was somewhere around $125 million. It's just relatively small dollar amounts compared to this. But it's like $5 billion could go a long way to fund programs that could make a huge difference. And so this is, thank you for standing up for the workers at your agency and bringing this message to everyone.
Yeah, I think what you find is that there was a video of Obama talking about how you get into local government and you think, oh, these goofballs, I'm going to go hire to fix this problem. And you get all the way to the federal government and you're still surrounded by goofballs who are just unaccountable to the people who elected them. And it's on the local level and it goes all the way up to the top.
Yeah, that's a great pivot, Lorene. We're going to pivot right off that statement. We're not talking to goofballs anymore, you guys. This is a goofball-free show. We do want to pivot, though, because we do have someone else in the studio. We've got Byron Sigcho Lopez. Welcome, Byron, who is running for alderman in the 25th Ward. That's a seat that just became open because Danny Solis decided not to run. But he was running as of when you filed to run for office. And I just want to a quick note. We did reach out to Ida Flores' campaign and did not hear back. We had invited Ilario Dominguez, but it turned out he had a conflict. So I just want to put that disclosure out there for folks who are going to comment about it.
And also, if you want your candidate to be on our show, don't harass us online. Just saying.
Yeah, we're nice. We're actually very reachable. We have, you know what? Shauna, we have a Facebook page. Did you know that?
Also, don't assume that two progressive women are not going to consider that there's a woman in the race.
Thank you. Yeah. No.
Just saying.
Yeah, just saying.
But I wanted to also mention that you guys are a couple, because this is our first couple that we've had on, and we think it's really cool and interesting.
Yeah, we should have been
power couple.
We should have been doing this around Valentine's Day.
That's right.
I think we were in a bar eating tater tots on Valentine's Day.
Oh,
so, super not romantic.
But I do like tater tots, though. But segueing, I do want to just, since I have it, I hope folks that are watching, we are on Facebook Live. As I mentioned, we have a Facebook page, facebook.com/ToTheLeftRadio, and all of our handles are at To The Left Radio. I want to show folks who can see this that I have a map of the 25th Ward. It is... someone has described it as a horseshoe. That's probably the closest, but as you can see, it's a very heavily gerrymandered. This is roughly the Chinatown area, and then you've got the West Loop and Pilsen in here. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the diverse communities that are represented by the 25th Ward. If you can talk a little bit about that, Byron.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And thank you again for the invitation. The 25th Ward is one of the most diverse communities or wards in the city. It has a Chinatown, Pilsen, Little Italy, the West Loop, McKinley Park. The Village, as it's called, has a strong African American community as well. So it's a very, very diverse community. Alderman Solis has been the alderman for 23 years. And so this is a very exciting time to have representation that reflects the values and principles of such a diverse community, diverse ward that has spoken and is excited about having new leadership, having a new direction. This is an area where 60% of the people voted for Bernie Sanders, had voted for new Assessor Fritz, has voted traditionally for progressive candidates in the last 8 years, and we're really excited about having an opportunity to make a difference.
And one of the main issues that I've heard from folks in the 25th Ward is the gentrification and development going on there. Did you want to speak a little bit about that issue for those who aren't aware or might not live in the ward?
Absolutely. And I was the former director of the Pilsen Alliance, an organization that has organized around this issue for over 20 years. And it's not simply gentrification the issue, because that's a complex matter, but it's really the root causes and the effects, which is displacement. And displacement at the massive level. We're talking about in the last 10 years, 10,000 residents left Pilsen alone. And the 25th ward is a problem. In Chinatown, we hear the same thing. In Little Italy, in the Village, we hear this as geographically located so close to downtown, we have that problem. 2,000 children are gone from public schools. So we have an issue of massive proportions. So the issue is not simply gentrification. Gentrification, is a very complex matter. Every resident, every neighbor that you talk to want improvements to their neighborhood. There's no doubt about that. And by design, I think that the mainstream narrative has done a lot of damage in terms of creating this divide that oftentimes can clash even to racial tensions. But really, when you talk to the neighbors, people want positive changes, want good schools, want affordability, want to bring people together. But big developers and a political system that is very corrupt and is benefiting from all these pay-to-play politics have created this massive problem of displacement that is not unique to Pilsen or the 25th ward, is across the city.
And one of the things you've been doing to work against that is you've been very involved in the Lift the Ban campaign. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I was one of the founders over a year and a half ago with great organizers like the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, Jawanza Malone, and many other leaders from the South Side, West Side, and the North Side, North Side Action for Justice. So this is a coalition, and that's important to mention. In Pilsen, we see, well, what can we do to address that? And the Lift the Ban coalition is important to understand the issue. Again, oftentimes mainstream media and neoliberal economists have a really bad tendency of pretending that they have facts when they don't. Right? So when rent control hasn't worked in other cities. The reality is we can even have a discussion here because it's banned at the state level. We cannot even have a discussion about rent stabilization because a Republican governor in 97 banned a democratic conversation. We know as a fact that in states like Massachusetts, municipalities that had rent control, and when there was an effort to repeal those efforts, municipalities that had rent control voted to keep rent control. So, and in big cities, we've seen this actually working, actually bringing tenants and landlords together. Finding legislation where the subsidies don't only go to the big developers today benefiting from TIF money, benefiting from tax breaks because they have good lawyers, can get good appeals, but also we're talking about benefiting the landlords who keep the rents affordable. The people who have been helping the neighborhood paying taxes for so long, right. Well, let's help them. And they can keep the rents affordable. And now we can have actually a community that continues to thrive in a diverse working class environment. And I tell you, across the world, across the city, we see that. That's what we want. I think that big developers and a political system that is failing us is opposing, I think, in our opinion, a tool that should be available and should be something that we can discuss about it and create a good building city council. That is our intention.
Okay, great. You are listening to the Left. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We are going to take just a quick break. You can watch us on To the Left Radio at Facebook.com. All of our handles are To the Left Radio. We'll be right back. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We're producing a show on WCPT Sundays at 1 o'clock.
What should we call it?
How about Smash the Patriarchy?
I like it, but that's a lot of pressure. What about left-leaning ladies?
What about woman-splaining?
Yeah, but what about when we have guys on? What about Madigan's worst nightmare?
I think it's enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in To the Left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
And we are back. You're listening to the Left. I'm Samina Mustafa.
And I'm Shauna East.
And we are talking right now. We've covered a lot of things. We talked about the federal shutdown with Lorraine Targos, who's with AFGE Local, but now we're talking to her partner, Byron Sixto Lopez, who is a candidate in the 25th Ward aldermanic race. And we were just getting ready to talk about some issues that are particular to the ward, some citywide issues, and just wrapped up a conversation about the rent control ban. By state law, we can't actually have rent control, so there's been a campaign, and Byron's been active in that. But we did have a question that came in from one of our viewers, listeners, if you've got that, Shauna.
Yes, I do. We have a question from someone named Joey who lives in Pilsen. He says he's lived in Pilsen since 2010 before gentrification as a renter and a disabled adult. What can you do to help save people like me and low-income families from being pushed out because rent is only increasing?
That's right, and that's what this campaign is so critical. Lifting the ban on rent control and passing a bill that addresses the rapid rent increases. And like Joy, there's thousands of people who have found themselves in this predicament. During Christmas time, we were talking to a family that got evicted because couldn't keep up with the rent increases, and we have a serious crisis in terms of affordability. So rent stabilization is one of those critical campaigns. That's what 75% of the people in the ward, tenants and landlords alike, support rent stabilization. We also need to talk about property tax assessment reform. When we see landlords, and talking small landlords, who oftentimes seniors don't even know they can appeal their taxes. The taxes sometimes are overassessed. People don't even know. And if they don't have the resources to get a good lawyer, simply then they're overpaying, or simply feeling themselves so overwhelmed that end up selling their homes or losing their homes. So those are the things that we're talking about. Having reform that actually helps the working people like Joy, so the rents don't continue to increase. But the politicians, the status quo, are our biggest obstacle. Barrios lost a campaign, obviously. Now there's a new assessor. But now we need political will to pass this key legislation. Property tax assessment reform. We also need to create more exemptions for property tax exemptions for long-term residents, for seniors, for people who have been in the community for a long time. And today, they cannot keep up with a large apparatus. And we're talking about different issues here, not only property tax assessments, but also inspectors. Now, inspectors have become, instead of an aid, we're helping to keep buildings up to code, as it's supposed to be. And now it's another tool to harass homeowners, to harass the small homeowners, to make sure that they do even above and beyond. We have never seen such an aggressive wave of inspectors, too, that often we have cases of developers actually being working in cahoots and being convicted by these kind of practices on the north side. The same companies are now operating in areas like Pilsen, where the average income continued to be $34,000 a year, but yet we're still seeing big development. Homes are now priced at over $800,000. So these are not normal trends. This is not the free market. This is not the invisible hand. They're very visible hands, very big developers, and it's nothing free about this. There's very clear the scheme. Developers paying, like it was in case of Alderman Solis, pay the winning through their neighborhood, paying for special treatment at the expense of the most vulnerable, at the expense of the small homeowners, the tenants, and that's what we're changing. We collected over 4,300 petitions to send a statement to say, no, we want something different and we know how to deliver. We have 10 years of experience. We have 20 years in the community doing this work, and we were going to make it happen because of people like Joy.
Yeah.
One more quick question from the audience, and that is, how do you think we should bridge the gap between the community and the Chicago Police Department?
That's a great question. I was talking in a forum the other day about that, and accountability is critical. We cannot talk about good relationships or trust when there's no accountability. When we cannot trust the very same institution like the Chicago Police Department that's supposed to, the mission is to protect and serve the community. And when we see cases like Juan McDonald, when we see more and more those cases where young people being victimized by their own police department, we need to talk about accountability. So CPAC is a key ordinance that we've been proposing for years to prevent this kind of cases, to create trust, to make sure that our communities are not afraid of their own police department. I mean, I'm talking about
for those who don't know, that's civilian oversight of the police.
Yeah, the Chicago Police Accountability Council, right? So that's a key ordinance. I thank you for to have the correct name. Those are key. And let's be clear. We talk about always the budgets. We talk about there's no money, we're broke. The city of Chicago in the last decade spent almost $500 million to settle cases of police brutality.
Right.
I mean, not only is the right thing to do, not only will create more trust, but also is fiscally responsible to make sure that we prevent these kind of cases in the first place. We talk about oversight, right? And oftentimes we say, well, the police will not be able to do their jobs and other things in every institution, for every public servant, we must have accountability and oversight. Otherwise, let's see what happened with Alderman Ed Burke. Right. We have our own officials harassing and extorting businesses. Right. That's the kind of city council we have today. And the police department is another institution that needs to be accountable, and we will make sure that we work towards that to create safer communities that actually are working in collaboration with every institution. But for that, we need accountability as a fundamental step.
Right. We're going to pivot a little bit. We've got someone who's dialed in and wants to talk about the shutdown. We've got George on the line. George, you're on the air with To the Left.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm just loving your show.
Well, thank you for listening.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm just, like so many other Americans, just out of my mind angry with the chief imposter, skipping a weekend or two at Mar-a-Lago and staying in the White House and saying, I'm here, I'm ready to deal, while the Democrats are off in some nice place watching a play. Well, there's a delegation of 30-odd Democrats down in Puerto Rico to celebrate the opening of Hamilton, thanks to its creator and cast, to raise money for the people of Puerto Rico who've gotten no reasonable amount of support from this administration. The same administration that is chopping funds from California, criticizing their forest management skills. At the same time, over half the forest land in California is federal land, and half the fires were on federal land. And this guy has got to go before he destroys us.
Well,
just as an aside, on a lighter note, I'd just like to mention, a few weeks ago, I was in the general downtown area, and I won't describe this vehicle because I don't want to make its owner a target, but it had a license plate of 7 letters that said ONTHLFT, on the left. I don't know if that's any of you,
no.
But somebody out there is spreading the good news.
George. Yeah, I'm hoping that's a super fan. I'm hoping, or somebody who just happens to just have a similar point of view. Well, we really appreciate your call, George. We're going to let Lorene chime in here. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for listening and for the call.
You're welcome.
Yeah, a lot of my colleagues at EPA were with the federal response in Puerto Rico with the Response Support Corps, and they were also talking about how they saw a lot of problems that they didn't have the resources to address. And so I'm glad Lin-Manuel Miranda is down there getting some really much needed support to bring the island back up to what it could be and give the people the resources they need to get their lives back on track.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that we've seen some folks like Jose Andres, the chef, who's traveled there many times and actually said, I'm going to feed folks who are affected by the shutdown. But it's the scale at which they can do what they do is really sort of very limited compared to what we could do if the government was operational and we had an administration that understood what was at stake and what was possible. So, but we're gonna we just got a few minutes left. I wanted to touch on something you said, Byron, talking a little bit about the Ed Burke case and corruption. And one of the things that is related to gentrification is aldermanic prerogative, which is essentially an aldermanic privilege, which is part of it. It overlaps with the campaign finance issue because developers can give money to aldermen. Aldermen ultimately have sort of veto power on what developments come into the ward. So that's sort of aggravating any. And so that both of those things kind of have to work in concert to really move the needle on this issue. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, and prerogatives has been abused, and in many instances, and usually as a bargaining tool to basically get donations.
Right.
So those are the things that we want to, and one of the things that we're proposing in order to address that is to have community-driven zoning processes, participatory budgets, to make sure that the government is disclosing all the information, that we're disclosing everything that's happening, so there's no behind doors meetings where these deals are being cut. When we make a decision and we pretend that this is not biased, that because they gave us money, we're not gonna play any favors. I mean, we have to be honest about these conversations. Developers are paying for a reason. A lot of these special interest groups pay their way into communities, and and that's the payment for. So we need to get big money out of politics as a fundamental step to be able to address some of those issues, so that we have a fresh shot at making good decisions that would benefit each community. As long as that's not the case, as long as big money and financial finance reform, I think that we must consider public funding for campaigns. I mean, it's incredible the amount of money that goes into these campaigns. Alderman Solis retires. I mean, it goes to a certain extent. The money can take you so far, but in the last mayoral race, $24 million. I mean, we're talking about, the last gubernatorial election, it was one of the if not the highest in the country. So we have a big issue in terms of accountability and in terms of finance, in terms of how decisions are made. And in order to address that, we need to get big money out of politics immediately, and we need finance reform on that, especially in campaigns is one of those. But I also think in the meantime, immediately, we need to make sure that transparency is not one of those empty words, right? That we make sure that public information is made public. Right. Participatory budgets, community-driven zoning process are one of those tools, but ultimately, the root cause is actually big money to politics, and we need to address that.
Right. And I know that, like, historically, I think even when Harold Washington came in, he sort of opened the books to everybody.
That's right.
And there was even a move by Rahm to kind of close the books again because, he's not, I don't think he's a real fan of transparency. But, Shauna, you were going to say.
And just to wrap up, we wanted to let folks know how they can plug in, learn more about your campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, website. We have our media, social media, and website now is the best way. Sigcho425.com is a website. Our social media is at Sigcho. All over all of Facebook and all that.
Sigcho is spelled SIGCHO.
Yeah, good point, Lori.
And are there any upcoming events or any
forums?
Anything that people can put on their calendar?
Yeah.
The next
there'll be we'll be having Days of Action on January 19th out of our campaign office at 1622 South Blue Island. And then there'll be a forum in the West Loop, I believe, on 38 South Peoria Street on Wednesday, January 23rd.
And do you have any suggestions for what people at home can do about the shutdown?
They should definitely be calling their senators and giving Mitch McConnell a call also to let him know that they want the government to reopen, and sharing their personal stories with the hashtag shutdown stories.
Yeah, that's another thing. When I was in D.C. talking to the staff members of Durbin's office and Duckworth's, they said email them, send them the stories, because they want to be able to, talk about that on the floor when these conversations are going on. So definitely do that if you're being impacted.
And I actually saw that some folks were, I think it might have been Duckworth's office, saying that her office is getting more pro-wall calls than not. So, like, even if you think that your rep is on your side or on the side of against the wall, just remind them if you have a chance to send them a note or give them a call. So
don't think because we're in a blue state we're safe. We need to still be doing that work and reaching out to our representatives. So
And what folks have to also remember is that, the House already passed a budget to reopen, so it's really up to the Senate right now. It really is Mitch McConnell and the Republicans that control the Senate to make this happen. Obviously, Trump is standing in the way and obviously playing games with them too, but it's, Mitch McConnell's been sort of MIA at best. But we have a show coming up next week, Shauna. Who are we talking to next week?
is next week the...
Yes.
Okay, next week is Tara Stamps,
Yes.
who's an aldermanic candidate. I cannot... Is it the 37th
I think it's
ward?
37th,
Okay.
yeah, 37th.
And then Jeanette Taylor
From
in
the
the 20th ward.
20th. So we're staying on the aldermanic city council.
Yeah, we're trying
races.
to spice things up around here in advance of the municipals.
Yeah.
And
So
let our audience hear from some great progressive candidates that
right,
they might
and
want
progressive women of color who are running. So
Correct.
which is exciting.
And Jeanette was a diet hunger striker.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly,
definitely.
exactly.
Sorry to
really,
spoil the headline of the next
really,
show.
really powerful. Really powerful stories. So we're really excited to have her on the show. But we want to thank Lorene Targos of the AFG Local 704, Byron Sixto Lopez.
Ms. Lady B.
Yes, Ms. Lady B, who's back.
Ms.
with
Lady
us.
B, yay! All
and-
those at home amplifying our message
Yeah,
on
thank
social
you.
media using our hashtag TO the left. That's to the left.
And real quick, we do have a Patreon. That's patreon.com/To The Left Radio. But we also have a fundraiser on March
Yes.
16th at the Hideout.
It's
So you can-
$40 per ticket, and you can send that to us via PayPal. Please do right now.
Yeah, do that right
Break
now.
out your phones or your laptops and send $40 per ticket with a little note to me at secretgeeksociety@yahoo.com is the PayPal account. So, ka-ching! Send us your money because this airtime is not free, folks.
And we're listener supported. We're progressive.
We want to keep Chicago's progressive talk progressive.
Yeah, we got to hold
So
it down, you
gotta
guys.
Send us some money, you guys.
Yeah,
Please.
yeah. But thank you all for listening. Thanks for folks calling in and sending Facebook messages. Joey, thanks for that very important question. We'll be back next week. Thanks, everybody.